In today's video article, we're going to look at a quote from science fiction and fantasy writer Stephen Barnes: read 10x your output and one level up. And this is a habit that he suggests you need to take up to support your writing goals. And there are several writers. We're going to look at Stephen King and Ray Bradbury in a minute and what they've said about what you should read. Before we dive into any of that though, if you want to get an email with a timestamped overview every time I release a new video, then head over to my website. You'll find it at deliberate-practice.com. Sign up for my email list. There's other content at the website. Plus, there's some thank you goodies for signing up. And in the weeks and months to come, I'll be putting in some special additional material that's for email subscribers only, and some of that's going to be really interesting. So I recommend going and doing that. Let's start the video itself by looking at what Stephen King has to say about writing. Now, in his book on writing, he issues what some people call the Great Commandment, which is read a lot and write a lot. Beyond the advice to read constantly and widely, and especially outside your genre, that's kind of the extent of his advice on the reading part of the equation. But Stephen King is very clear on the connection between reading and writing, and he says, if you don't have the time to read, you don't have the time or the tools to write. The two activities are inseparable for any serious writer. Now, earlier than this, Ray Bradbury, for a long while, he's got his own equation. I've written about this more in my book, Lessons on Writing from Ray Bradbury, which you can find on Amazon. It's linked in the description to this video. It's inexpensive on Kindle, so go and check that out. And if you purchase it, that would be great, and thank you very much. And all sales help support the video channel and allow me to make more videos to help aspiring fiction writers. Now, Ray's equation is read one short story, one poem, and one essay, all before going to sleep at night. What Ray never does is he never explains why that particular set of things, a short story, a poem, an essay, all before going to sleep, is so powerful. He just says it is powerful, and there's two kind of hidden secrets in that, and I don't have time to cover them in this video, but they are covered in the book. So if you want to find what those two hidden secrets are, and maybe you can adapt them for your particular needs, then you'll need to check that out in the book that's pictured there. Let's turn to Stephen Barnes. As I've said, Steve is a science fiction and fantasy author. He's also a screenwriter. He's now a director of films. He's a black belt in multiple martial arts. He's a great guy, really interesting. He's a great teacher. I first came across him in 2005, I think, and shortly after coming across him, I purchased one of the first iterations of what he calls his life writing course. And there's some great stuff in there. If you're a beginner, you could do far worse than choose Steve as your teacher to get started with. But he's a cool guy who, if you want to get better at writing, you should definitely be listening to him. His perspectives are often quite different from other people, other writing teachers, and he's just an all-round good guy. His advice is read 10x your daily output, and also read one level up from where you are. So we'll talk about one level up in a second. If you're writing 1,000 words a day, you should read at least 10,000 words a day. That's maybe 40 to 50 pages of a conventional kind of paperback or hardback. If you're reading on Kindle, I'm not quite sure what that would equate to, so you'll have to work that out. The interesting thing is, in the original life writing course that I mentioned, the advice wasn't the same. The advice for quantity was read between 10x and 50x your daily output. So if you get to 50 pages a day, that's brilliant, and try and maintain that as a reading habit in the evening. I find reading before bedtime, away from devices, is a great way to turn off from the day and prep myself for sleep. So I use it like that, and it's a great thing to do. Helps me sleep better, and also reading lots of stuff, lots of different fictional material, gives you lots of ideas and you see how other people are doing things, and we'll come to that more in a second. Steve says input should always be greater than output. So if you're not reading 10,000 words a day, you're going to struggle in time over to keep writing 1,000 words a day, because you're going to basically drain the well. So that's Steve's stipulation about quantities that you should write. The one level up part is the interesting part. Steve has got a catchy thing that he uses in various interviews and videos, and he says, if you want to write comic books, read popular fiction. If you want to write popular fiction, read bestsellers. If you want to write bestsellers, read classics. And if you want to write classics, choose your grandparents carefully. So it's an interesting series of lines, but there's a problem with it. And that problem is the classifications that Steve uses are really vague. Now, I've spoken in other videos. One of my personal writing targets is I've got an epic fantasy long form project that I want to write, and I don't envisage getting to it much before autumn of 2026. It's July 26th, I think, today, of 2025, so a long while. But one of the things that I wanted to do was start reading one level up from where I think that project is, so that I could start using this concept of Steve's. And I had an idea of an author and a book that's comparable to my epic fantasy long form idea. And so what I had to do to read one level up from that was create my own level chart, and I put 5 levels in, and got a load of fantasy stuff. I've been reading fantasy since I was a teenager. Started out with kind of Conan the Barbarian, those kind of stories when I was 12, 13. And obviously as I've got older, my tastes have matured, although any writer can learn from the kind of energy that Robert Howard brought to those original Conan stories. They literally sparkle and crackle on the page. But with epic fantasy, I made a 5-level chart, talking with some other fantasy writers, doing some other things to make this chart, so I could identify where the writer I wanted to be comparable to was, and then that would tell me what was one level up. So level 1 was like simple fantasy, like Terry Brooks, David Eddings, Terry Weiss and Margaret Hickman, those kind of writers and books. Level 2 is kind of Terry Goodkind, Sword of Truth, some Brandon Sanderson, Robert Jordan, David Gemmell, those kind of writers. With Brandon Sanderson, it's quite tricky because some of his earlier books are kind of level 2, but some of his later books, like The Way of Kings and stuff, they're level 3 books. And level 3 books, I've got people like George R. Martin, Stephen Erickson, Guy Gavriel Kay, Patrick Rothfuss. And with Guy Gavriel Kay, you'll see there I've written 2 specific books in brackets. Those are 2 books, The Lions of Al Rassan and a book called Tigana, which I think are probably the 2 books in the pantheon of fantasy that are most like the kind of book that I'm striving to write. I went further though and did level 4, because level 4 is obviously where I'm going to read. And level 4, you've got authors like Ursula Le Guin, Gene Wolfe, Mervyn Peake, China Miéville. I always want to put an L in his name and say Miéville, but it's Miéville. Patricia McKillop, her Riddle Master of Head trilogy is brilliant. And then there's a couple of Guy Gavriel Kay books. There's actually 4 that he's written that I would class as level 4 books rather than level 3. If you're a Guy Gavriel Kay fan, they are the 2 Sarantian books and the 2 books set in the alternate Chinese world. And then level 5, this is kind of literary writers who use fantasy elements. So you've got guys like Haruki Murakami, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Georges Louis Borges, and so on. There's other writers like that. Salman Rushdie's done some books where he's used fantasy elements to do his writing, to enhance the stories he's telling. And there are other writers like that. I'm not sure that those writers particularly would appeal to me, and I've not read many of those guys, or the equivalent female authors either. But the 5 levels that I've put out there should give you an idea of the kind of thing I'm getting at. And if you can identify what level you're writing at, identify some authors in that level, and then find the authors the next level up, it makes it a much easier. The one level up approach then suddenly becomes much more useful. And as I said, my epic fantasy would fall into level 3, so I know I need to read more of level 4 style books, and I definitely want to read more Ursula Le Guin. I definitely want to read more Gene Wolfe. I've read the first of Mervyn Peake's, and I'm not going to try and pronounce the name because I will get it wrong, the book about the big cities. But I read that when I was quite young. I think I read it because Stephen King recommends it in Danse Macabre. I think now that I'm older that perhaps that might be better for me. Anyway, I've got some ideas of books to read, and I intend to read them purely for my reading habit, and hopefully that will help when I come to write my epic fantasy long form story, which should be a level 3 kind of story. However, you can also apply this idea of levels 1 to 5 to craft techniques. That's things like world building, dialogue, character development, and plot development. I don't have time in the video to go into all this, but there are ways where you can set up books. So if you know, right, dialogue's a problem for me, or plot development's a problem for me, you can take the same approach and split it into 5 levels, work out which level you're at, and then read some books in the next level of that specific element that you're wanting to read more, or read at a higher level. And then what that also does is it makes your reading habit more diverse. So you're not just reading epic fantasy. So maybe if like you were looking at, so let's say action scenes was something you were doing, and you were reading thrillers and you were reading historical fiction, stuff like that, you're getting lots more literary influences going into the basement. Steve calls them the boys in the basement. However you like to think of it, going into your subconscious that your brain will draw on when you're writing and developing stories. So this is another aspect of the technique that works really well. And by combining one level up in the genre you want to write in, and one level up with craft techniques, and I'm sure you can think of other craft techniques that I've not listed, what you can do is then you can create a rich reading diet that's diverse, draws across different genres, that will support your writing. There's more detail on this in the Writing Vault, which I'll talk about in the next slide. I don't have time to go into it in more detail here, otherwise the video would be 60 minutes long, and I really don't want to do that. I don't want to impinge on your time like that. So if you are interested in this, you can either, I've given you enough detail where you can start researching it yourself, or if you want to know more from my research into all this, you can find that in the Writing Vault. So closing out, what I like about Steve's method is we get guidelines on precisely how much to read, and that's 10 to 50x what we're aiming to write per day. And we also get ideas on what to read, so you're always looking to read beyond the level that you want to write at. Remember his line, input is greater than output. One caveat, which I've not bullet pointed out, if you've got a favourite author, so let's say for me, for example, that I'm aiming to write at level 3 epic fantasy. Guy Gavriel Kay's latest book came out at the end of May, Written on the Dark it was called, or is called. Having read that, I would say that's a level 3 book. But if you've got an author whose writing you really like and it doesn't fall into this one level up thing, don't worry about that. Read books that you're passionate to read, so you can throw those into your reading diet as well. Okay, you got any questions on this? Drop me an email, paul@deliberate-practice.com. Email is better than leaving a comment under the YouTube video, because now that I've got 41 videos, whatever it is, the way the YouTube's comment system works, it's really hard for me to follow threads where I've answered someone and they've posted something else for me to answer. So if I've missed something like that, it's not because I'm ignoring you, it's because I'm not seeing it because of the way YouTube handles that. And I mentioned the Writing Vault. This is a resource I'm putting together for aspiring and or frustrated fiction writers. Includes there's 13 or 14 entries on the Reading One Level Up, which will be interesting for you if this video's whetted your appetite. The URL's there. There'll be a link in the description. Go check it out. See what I've written about it. See if it sounds like the kind of thing you might like. If you've got questions on it, use the email address and just drop me an email and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Okay, that's it for this video. And I hope you're reading a lot, because reading is an important part of being a writer. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for your time watching it. I'll catch you in the next video.